The second, Budget 101, I want to thank Maureen Caraballo and Nick Macri and anyone else in her department for making sure that this presentation was prepared. They spent a lot of time making sure that all the numbers added up and all the data was correct. So thank you in advance, Maureen, as usual, for making sure all of the, everything related to finances, the finance and operations of our system are done, at such a high level. So thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So before Maureen starts with our enrollment data, the title of the presentation, which is a little different. We did shift a little bit from last year's 101 presentations, where we now are looking more at, how do we describe for you all of the important drivers that go into budget development. And in this presentation, we wanted to make sure we emphasize the role of student enrollment, class size, and funding challenges, which are faced by all school districts. Certainly in New York State, but it's probably everywhere in the country. What we wanted to emphasize in this presentation is a focus on another strategy for closing budget gaps, which are sort of something that we all have to look at and study and try to figure out, because what we don't want to do is affect the overall functioning and operation of the school system by cutting so deeply that it impacts the quality of education in Hastings, which the community values a great deal, which property, homes and property value are based upon, the school system. So we want to present to you a more comprehensive strategy and approach to looking at, how do we in a tax cap environment provide, a high quality educational program without having to cut positions and cause other kinds of things that are unpleasant in the school system to take place, which some of that we will review in today's presentation from last year. So that's our most current example of what happens when the primary focus is on using reducing existing programs and services to close a budget gap. So we want to propose to you a different way, or a more comprehensive way of looking at that. So Maureen, I'll advance the slide. So
yes,
go right
ahead. Thank you. Yes, so we're really just starting out. We're not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on these slides, but we figured, obviously, looking at the expense side of our budget, and as we always say when we're discussing our budget, the majority of our expenses is driven by our teaching, not only teaching staff, our staff. We're a service business, and over 80% of all of the money we spend goes into for individuals and in all areas of our schools. So this is just where we currently are, and we did present this last year, and it does tie in when we start talking about where our current enrollments are, where we see our enrollments going, and programs and services. So here is just a very quick overview of Hillside School. This actually comes from a slide deck last year that was presented by Amy Cases, and it really just breaks down the teaching staff at that building, both general classroom teachers, our special education teachers, as well as our special area teachers. And I know we did speak a lot about this last year, and how tricky it is in a small district either to add and/or when we have to take away, the difficulties around that. We can go to the next slide, Valerie.
Okay. Oops, sorry.
That's fine. So this, I'm sorry.
Oops,
Okay.
let me go back.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll go back. Yeah, we'll go back a couple. I guess the slide 3. Thank you.
Right there.
So this is our current, again, not that, the only thing I will point out on this that I think everyone's pretty much aware of is that the class sizes this year were absolutely impacted by a few factors. Obviously, due to COVID, we did see many families make a decision to either pull their child out for the current year, either to homeschool or join a pod or private school again. So in looking at our enrollments this year, we have an asterisk there. And I do, as we talk about what we're projecting next year, if I can kind of just give you a very broad overview, but I do have the data behind it. But obviously our enrollment number this year really isn't, it would not look like this had not COVID been a case. And also we believe there were even people who initially had indicated they would enroll their children in kindergarten, but decided to hold back, just not, with unsure and maybe just, uncomfortable with sending their child into school. So our current kindergarten class, of course, is a much lower number than typical, that we typically see there. But again, not so much lower. We're usually about 17 or so, but it did actually work out well in order to bring our kindergartners in this year. So yeah, it ended up being okay. But again, that you'll see basically our average class sizes are typically somewhere from 18 to 23 at Hillside. But this one's a bit lower. Okay, so this would be our more typical average class sizes, and we'll get further into enrollment projections that will show you not only next year's projection, but a multi-year projection. These projections, which I'll get into a little more detail later, are based upon information that is not internal to us. We get it, and it's I'm loss of a word, but each district, you do work with an outside company that helps take the live birth data and produce projections on your enrollment. So just for next year, right now we are projecting 125. We'll get into where that number is coming from. Again, made the adjustments for students we're assuming will come back from pods or otherwise being homeschooled. So next year we are seeing it if a potential of an additional section needed at Hillside. And we are right now only looking at potentially one section. As you can see, our average class sizes at the 3rd and 4th grade, although not completely high, are bubbling up there at about 22 to 23. This is Farragut. Again, a lot more complex because obviously this is average class size, but you can have some very small classes within these averages, and a little bit some higher, as anyone who has a child in the middle or high school knows that there are some of those outliers. But basically this is just basically lays out the FTEs, which look a little different at the middle and high school level, and the different programs there, and with the average class size. And the reason we're supplying this is I know there is some interest around the class sizes that we run, and you can kind of see here where the majority of our class sizes are in that low 20 range for the the majority of the subject areas. So of course at music you may have some low at 5 and up to 50 depending on the what's being taught. Hastings High School, again, different FTEs, the breakout of how the staff is allocated at the high school, the enrollment, which of course is based on the children that are enrolled in those classes, and average class sizes. And again, there are times where there could be a class in here that could be 25, and then in some subjects you could have 8 and 9 in a particular class. So of course our principals, when they present their budgets this year, they can provide a little bit more detail and highlight where some of those higher class sections may be. So when I spoke about the enrollment projections, again, this is something that is based on data. It is driven on live birth data, cohort survival, and housing sales and demographic shifts. And again, this is, as all schools, we need this service done for us. And what we had noticed in the last few years, and it's been consistent. Again, sometimes the numbers don't always pan out exactly the way they're projected, but one of the things that has been consistent in all the projections that we have been using is our enrollment has steadily maintained, if not increased, 1 or 2% each year for the last at least 10 years. I think I had mentioned to Valerie yesterday, when I started in the district, I know it was a very long time ago, but our enrollment was only about 1,100 students at that time. So, I think we've been maintaining somewhere in the high 1500s to the mid 1600s. And looking at this trend data, which again is based upon live birth data and housing sales, it is suggesting that we're going to continue to see a steady and slightly increased enrollment at Hillside School. So again, that
also supports, as you know, the decision to engage in a construction bond project to ensure that there's additional space to account for this increase in classes and in student enrollment, you know, between now and 2025.
Yes. And then again, the middle school, and we see, we'll see obviously over time if those numbers that we're seeing kind of being projected for Hillside, obviously they make their way into the middle and high school. And again, that is something we always need to keep on our radar as we're thinking of budget planning, because the impact of an increase of a section at a middle or high school is a more costly because of the way the way that is staffed. So again, it is a very important component as we plan our 5-year lookouts at budgets, because we do need to consider what our demographic and enrollment information are suggesting and what we should be thinking about as we plan for both facilities and our budgets. And again, at the high school, similar trends we're seeing. High school, based on the trend data, is showing that they will continue to have that 1,500 to 1,700 enrollment. It was a little higher years ago. So again, it seems to be in the last 10 years to kind of be in that range. But again, if there is an increase of a section at the high school, that's where occasionally where we get those blips, we'll have to address that and be thinking about what the impact that may be on staffing in the upcoming years. And again, I just note, and at the high school and middle school as well, we did have some families that either chose to withdraw their student for the year or choose a private option. But you know, we not as much so as we saw at Hillside. But this is, I mean, the point of even bringing this data is just really to kind of demonstrate that this is, you know, a big factor what drives our budget, because it is driven on students, enrollments, and individual student needs. So, you know, as we're thinking about, you know, creating our next year's budget, we have to plan for the students that we believe will be with us. So we did, I believe, present this slide at the last Budget 101, but I think it's important to have it here just to remind people of our budget approach. So these are some, but not all, of our budget drivers. Each year we begin our budget process using a zero-based budget approach, meaning we look at each year as a new year. And of course, you know, some of the things we know will roll over, but we really look at it and you know, look at our staffing to meet the needs of this upcoming school year that we're entering. So that's what the zero-based budget approach means. Again, enrollment, student and needs drive the budget. And that's really the main, you know, single largest budget driver. Many expenses are out of the district's control. And again, just to know, for example, our yearly rate of increase on our retirement sister contributions is one example of that. And that is given to us by the state. And again, it is based upon the way the individual retirement systems perform and in terms of return on investment. And again, that is an amount that is unknown to us and again is out of our control. Unfunded mandates. We don't have enough time this evening to talk about what that means and all the things that are included in there, but one very timely example of that is the reentry plan and things that districts were required to put in place in order to reopen schools. I mean, even just screeners, having additional nursing areas set up so that we had a sick room. So that's just an example of something that we had to very quickly put into place in this year. And that is not something that we receive any money back in order to meet that need. Again,
the unfunded mandate is also tied to the next bullet item, which is student needs assessment, because what Melissa Szymanski was engaged in with our building leaders and, you know, actually all the administrators and all the educators was trying to identify early enough into the new school year the impact of not being in school since March. So we had to obtain and acquire some assessment tools which we did not use prior to the pandemic. So that was an expense, and a fairly large one, because there wasn't a one-size-fits-all model. There was there was a need for professional learning with new tools that teachers had never used before. We spent some time on making sure that we looked at ways to support children who had some experiences during the spring that were affecting them from a social, emotional, or mental health perspective. So a lot of information, through those screeners, to just give us sort of a baseline, look into, where students were, what they needed, and then we did shift into purchasing a lot of those resources to assist us and better identifying what students needed. And so that's actually a very timely example of a combo of an unfunded mandate that's driven by the need to obtain new assessment tools to understand what students needed, and therefore go into the new school year being able to support their needs. As you recall, one of the earlier expenditures was also tied to, a needs assessment, if you will. So we offered a summer learning program, it was targeted to students who we knew had been impacted by not being in school and not having, the regular instruction, not working in a format in which that supported them if we were not in a pandemic. So those are real realities that we face, and that will still be reflected as a driver into the 2021-2022 budget. I'll just go on. I'll just finish these three, Maureen. Jump in if I may.
Of course. Yeah.
Educational program development and facilities. I mean, again, we are. We want to make sure that we provide the resources and tools that teachers need, whether it be, working on, how to create more student-centered learning environments where children, may work, in project-based learning, or it may mean restructuring course offerings, because there's a request to provide more opportunities for children to take certain courses, whether it's STEM related courses or something else that would be important. It requires making sure that our facilities are safe and well kept, that we don't have, cracked sidewalks where somebody could, automatically, could accidentally, injure themselves, or, any internal, similar to your home, in any internal types of facilities needs and repairs. Those are always important, and that need to be maintained so that, they over time don't, escalate and become, major problems. So it's, whether it's plumbing or it's some other issue, there's a need to always make sure that the physical plants are well maintained and up to date. The work that is underway to make sure that what we do in our schools is aligned to what the expectations are when children come through the school system from kindergarten to graduation. What are those skills that they have to, not only skills, learner dispositions, competencies, and proficiencies will they need, that's not just dependent upon the content, but what they can do with their content, and what the world expects them to do, and how the economy has shifted, and what the jobs will be, and what college will expect of them, and what ongoing learning will look like, that may not just be 4 years and you go out and you do those things that you want to do, but perhaps there's some adjustment in the way in which that flows, that's different from how it may have been in the past for those of us who are participating in this meeting. And the planning of how to execute that. How do we, after the entire school district and community identifies those learner dispositions, competencies, and the skills and proficiencies. How then do we ensure that we're integrating all of those into curriculum, instruction, assessment, the learning environment, and professional learning? So that phase of work is very much, on the horizon and soon to be started. And then finally, employee contracts and benefits. As Maureen said, we're a service industry. So the way that the services are offered is by having, various people with high levels of specializations and certifications work with different groups of students and or other employees who may not be physically in the classrooms, but that they are hired to be able to do specialized types of jobs. And all of those contracts have built in cost of living raises, and they differ for different individuals within those bargaining units on the basis of their longevity, certification, their experience, and so forth. And then benefits, that come along with that, healthcare cost, and so forth. Those are driven, the increases in benefits are driven by the consortium that we participate in. And even though that consortium tries hard to keep down cost, there are always going to be increases that, the consortium can't manage, and therefore, those are passed on to each district that participates in them. So those are the budget drivers that we face every budget development year.
So I'll hop on. You want me to hop in on this? Okay. So again, and this is another, I think many of you that were following our budget discussions last year know that this particular year, 2021, as well as thinking about 21, 22, are very unique in that it's unlike any other time when you're trying to develop a budget, because now you have, even in addition to the normal unknowns or things that you don't necessarily have that information when you're developing it. With COVID, it did add another layer to that. So these are some, and some are just would be a normal kind of, year over year, and some of them are definitely related to the current situation we're in. So again, how many students will we have next year? We talked a lot about enrollment. Obviously, we have our projections, and that really helps us. It gives us some level of information, but again, there's some change in that, and also the types of students and the needs of those students. So those are things that we don't always have all the information on when we're in the process of developing that budget. Again, this is related to COVID. Will we need to operate both virtually and in-person instruction next year? How many staff members may retire? And again, it could be our normal amount of retirees, and we may see some people more because of the current situation. Will we need to implement additional supports for students whose learning gaps have widened this year? I mean, there's been a lot of discussion at board meetings around this, and I think that is still something, as Valerie had talked about, really that would be data driven as it was this year. But again, gathering that information, and that at this point we don't really know the full impact of that as of yet. What kinds of enhanced cleaning procedures may be needed on a permanent basis? Now with COVID, there may be a change in how we clean our buildings just going on in the future, just to ensure any type of anything that people can, catch. There may be a need to kind of put more focus into that more than we already had. And what additional staff may be needed? Again, this is a COVID-related one, if 6 feet of social distancing is required. And also part of that, which is not, I don't have it on this particular slide, but if we are still going to need that additional nursing staff. So much of those expenses that we had this year, as of today, we're not 100% clear if those things will not be needed for next year. So again, that is part of our thinking in our budget development, along with the previous budget driver slide. So just to kind of, this is a high level. I don't want, we still are working through our budget. Again, this is early, although we will be presenting our first draft of that budget in the beginning of February to the board. But just to kind of give you a very quick overview of what our rollover expenses are. And when I say rollover, it is looking at what our current staffing is, and more or less assuming that most of them will be with us next year, and what will the cost of people coming back next year, the cost of their contracts and their, as Valerie said, each contract's a bit different, and what the cost of that year-over-year expenses to us. So just to give you, even if we do not do one additional thing, the contractual increases, again, this is an approximate cost, is about $850,000, and that's for all of our employees. Health insurance and employee retirement contributions right now are based upon the amounts that we're told that these are going to be going up, would require an additional $450,000 worth of spending. COVID-related expenses, again, we spoke about that we're still, at this point, we're not quite clear on how much we should be earmarking for that. But again, assuming there may be a need for that, we're putting $175,000 in that number. Other contractual increases, that includes everything from our Con Ed bills to our phone service, all the different types of other contracts the district has. Again, typically they do go up by 2 to 3%, and that would be approximately $50,000. And then again, this last amount, and this is very early on in our budget discussions, but if there are children that have increased services in their individual their individual education programs, we are currently projecting that to be about $175,000. So again, sorry, Valerie. Yeah, so just to kind of, just where we start, like just to kind of, move into next year, we are looking at a close to $1.7 million increase in expense year over year. And there are some things that came out and things that got in, but again, that's pretty much a rollover. So, so thinking about that number, and this is one of not only our challenge, but most districts' challenge, how do you balance a budget that is tax cap compliant? And we'll talk about, again, what that means, just remind people, when your year over year expenses are currently now going to be about double what that number would allow us to raise in taxes. So again, just if we were to use the model, and this is where we wanted to start the conversation tonight. We as a district have been tax cap compliant since the inception of it. Like all districts, there are years where either that number was higher, and there were a certain amount of years. Most districts know that you can live under to a certain point, but there's a point in which the numbers aren't going to start to add up, and you're going to find yourself, as Valerie said, in order to stay within that figure, there is no other option but to make reductions. So currently, if we were to approach this upcoming budget and with the goal to stay tax cap compliant, if that was our only goal, currently we would need to cut an additional $750,000 from what we're initially projecting. And then, the next question, then how does a district go about creating a tax base that can sustain our programs and services? So the tax cap compliant we'll talk about what that actually means, but districts aren't required to present budgets that are tax cap compliant, but there is, we'll talk later about how that vote is and what is required in order to pass something that is above that amount. What if the state is unable to guarantee us our full funding under the proposed budget? That's another challenge on top of this very low tax cap rate that we're facing this upcoming year. We're also still extremely unclear, and I think the state is really unclear because they're waiting on relief from the federal government on what kind of funding are we going to receive from them next year. So, this is an extremely challenging space we find ourselves in. But we need to start, thinking about what would our strategies be. So again, this is just a quick calculation tax cap. I'm not going to walk through each line. It will be up so people can look at it. Basically, with the allowable tax cap increase under New York state law for Hastings on Hudson next year will be 1.77%. The CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that needed to be used to formulate this cap was released yesterday, and that number is 1.23. And again, it gives us the ability to increase our tax levy 1.77%. Although it does seem like a good amount of money, it is $700,000. As I kind of shared with you earlier, our expenses, as they stand today, are more than double that going into next year. So, you know, that those two numbers do not add up. So this, okay, yes, go ahead, Valerie.
Oh, you know what? This is your slide. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, so tax cap challenges. Again, tax cap, it is very challenging, and these are just some of the many reasons why it is. So the tax cap is tied to the levy increase and not the overall increase in the budget. And what that means is that you're not allowed to increase your total spending 1.77% next year. It's only the portion of the levy. And again, when I show you just kind of a budget overview, I'll just point it out because it's a little bit hard to understand when I'm just giving that sentence. The tax cap doesn't take into account that most of our expenses are increasing significantly higher than the average CPI. Again, you know, as we spoke about our contracts, salary schedules, this is not unique to Hastings, so this is not in any way, shape, or form directed at our collective bargaining groups, but these collective bargaining agreements, which are standard across all districts, were created decades before the tax cap came into existence. Step increases, which are the ways in which people are kind of, they get an increase for longevity, I guess, in the district. They increase on a rate of close to 2% to almost 5% each year, depending on the individual contract. So again, this is just an increase that's built into the way the contracts are built. And again, every district has them. Individual student needs are not factored into the tax cap calculation. And again, it doesn't allow for, if you do have, for an example, a child that needs some specialized placement, it would not allow you to exclude that expense or add to the allowable limits. So again, you could have a child new to the district, and if they're this particular child, whatever program they need, that has to come out of that overall increase, that 700,000 I mentioned. Unanticipated expenses, you could have a fairly large unanticipated expense. I use building repairs. Again, it could be anything, but they are not an exclusion. So you just sort of have to figure out within your spending plan how you would pay for that. So again, this is what makes the tax cap extremely challenging to create a budget and be compliant. And we've done so for many years, but again, it was something that most people and many people in other districts have gone for an override, and, you know, maybe earlier than we needed to, but, you know, we are kind of at a place in which we're really, it would be very difficult to stay within that increase. Do you want me to take this one too?
Go right ahead.
Okay, so based on our current formula, so state aid, and we did, we actually focused a lot of our time at our first Budget 101, and again, we felt it was really important because, again, the state aid, as we know, last year was really the reason for the need to make some tough decisions and very things that I think people are still feeling the impact for. So, you know, again, we find ourselves that situation, you know, we all know that the state of New York, that the entire country, there's a issue with money. So, you know, what right now, as we're looking at 21-22 school year, you know, in our normal, you know, creation of the budget, without thinking about what's currently going on, we would be eligible for about 5.3 million or so in aid for this upcoming school year. So we all know that the state current revenues are down significantly from the previous year. Shortfalls, and that when I say shortfalls in the state's revenues, would require deductions in aid to balance their budget, because they are required under state law to deliver and to adhere to a balanced budget. And then in order for us, meaning the school district, to be insured, I would say close to our full aid, it's really going to require the federal government to give individual states, to give them some relief, because although they've earmarked in the last stimulus plan a good amount of money towards education, that money, although it comes through the states give us, fund a good portion of the schools through their own revenues. So if they still have a shortfall, we'll still have a shortfall. So again, in order for us not to feel that impact, they're also going to have to receive some relief. And this is just, again, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but just to kind of give you a sense of, as I mentioned, under normal circumstances, we should receive 5.3 million. 5.4, 5.3, somewhere in that neighborhood. If the state needed to, or their revenues fell, or below what they had anticipated, and they needed to make those type of reductions in their school aid budget, a 5% reduction just of our total aid would be 265,000, 10%, 530, 15, 795, and 20% over $1 million. And again, I even a 5% reduction, any type of reduction is makes it very difficult to balance our budget. So what do we do? So this first, this is just one I showed this the other night at our finance committee meeting, and really just wanted to demonstrate here. This is a scenario in which there's either relief received at the state level, and the district receives what we hope to receive in state aid. And even in this scenario, just to kind of point out, even if that is the case, which would be wonderful, and even with using some other appropriated fund balance and some of our reserves that we do have available to us, even in this scenario, you will see that our property tax levy would in fact be higher than that, the tax cap limit. But really just to kind of focus first on like what does that mean if we don't get a rate? So I mean, as I had mentioned earlier, we kind of have this challenge. If we get our full aid, it'll be a lot easier for us to deal with what we do with the levy. But I think this year we're kind of looking at having a lower levy to start with, and then thinking about what will potentially happen if those aid scenarios come in last. And again, I just want to show them here, and then we can talk. We'll talk about strategy on later slides, but just to kind of give you some look at that. And then this would be at a 10% reduction. And then at that point, we may decide to implement some more money from our reserves. But again, if you look at the overall tax rate increase here, with a 10% aid reduction, it would put us at about 4% of a tax rate increase. And again, we're hoping, this isn't going to happen, but we do need to be thinking about that could potentially, be the case. And I think if we were to need to address some of a shortfall in state aid, then we do have a conversation about how much fund balance would we use to cover some of that shortfall in revenue. But in terms of thinking about our own year-over-year expenses, we need to also be thinking about how do we build our levy. And we're going to talk about that in future slides. But again, just to kind of start, this is unfortunately last year when we started talking about this, it was, much later in the budget season. So we wanted to start these conversations earlier about, how we're looking and what our strategies are, and looking at if any of these scenarios were to happen, and what, how we're going to move forward and address it. So again, this is sort of the worst case scenario in state aid, taking a 20% reduction as we plan for this current fiscal year. And then, you can kind of see where there are some increases in the allocation of fund balance, again, trying to say, how much can we, allocate to offset some of that shortfall. But then, as you can see here in this scenario, it would require, a higher increase on the levy. And again, this is with the thought that we don't want to reduce and possibly a restoration of some programming in this number as well. So, kind of thinking about, what is the right number for us, and how do we go about this? Like, do we approach it solely from if we have a reduction in, I'm sorry. Okay, sure, Tim. We can start looking at, scenarios in which if there is a shortfall, what would be our strategy to address it on the state aid? But then, what is our strategy for the amount we think is appropriate to levy in property taxes, and then to either maintain or, potentially if there's a need to add back or add some staffing at the district. Do you want to take this one, Valerie?
I'll take this one.
Sure.
So
Perfect.
Maureen and I have talked a lot about how else can we look at the development of this budget that doesn't depend upon reducing programs and services. We have a slide a little later that's a review of the reductions that we did take last year, and those were, it was pretty challenging, to do those, to for the budget managers to make those decisions, because just as they, took, sort of, they certainly did what we asked them to do, knowing full well what the, ramifications were with regards to not being able to bring in a balanced budget to the board. They did their best to, identify, budget codes that they could make reductions in that could stay as far away as possible from the classroom, but that becomes pretty challenging, as we look at, our, the value that's, subscribed to the school system, and the value of having, class sizes that are not too large, of having, offerings that are, that our students have available to them, and, those really important, not only electives, but, not being able to offer electives if there's a reduction in staffing, which then triggers, an inclusion of more study halls, for example, at the secondary level, at the high school level. So that's the trade-off when, we depend upon one methodology to bring in a balanced budget, and that we end up in the end, severely impacting, programming and the, I think the overall, as I said, value that the community has with regards to the school system. So, if the district's aid, was reduced by 10%, how then would we close that budget gap? So, people think that the fund balance is like a savings account. Well, it's not. The fund balance, is, it can be used sort of at one time, to close, sort of a gap along the lines of, that's associated with the tax levy. Fund balance cannot be used, for ongoing expenses. So, if a teacher or a program or a teacher aid was added, to the budget using fund balance, that means that every year moving forward, that amount would have to be reduced from the fund balance. If it's not reduced from or taken from the fund balance, then something else in the budget has to be taken out. So the funds have to come from someplace. And there are really, some pretty devastating situations that have occurred, in New York State, where some school districts have used fund balance as a savings account. And so instead of, looking at other ways to approach balancing the budget, they, every year those positions that were added, added in or positions that stayed in a budget, or services that stayed in a budget, every year the funds would have to be taken from the fund balance to cover those positions. And after a while, your fund balance is going to be down to nothing. And then you're going to really face a train wreck to try to balance your budget, because you're always going to have, as Maureen pointed out earlier, expenses associated with contracts and with benefits. So how much does 1% add to the individual taxpayer over the course of a year? That ends up being $178.56 for an average home. That's 1% added. An average home assessed at $840,000. So when you look at it like that, $178.56 for that homeowner every year, that then helps to drive the kind of decision around whether or not that should take place. That really personalizes what the implication is financially to an individual taxpayer. And then that tax cap compliant increase would be $316 per year. And the tax rate increase to maintain our programs would then be, $535 per year. So
Yes.
it's really important. Go ahead, Maureen.
Oh yeah, no, I just on this particular slide, I think what we were trying to demonstrate here was is tied to the illustration in which if we were kind of suggesting if we were to, in a scenario where two scenarios. So if we were short on state aid, we would be willing, because we would think that would be something that in a year or so would be rectified. We could potentially use some of that, fund balance to help offset a plug for 1 year. But I think in the one piece, and again, not to minimize any type of tax increase to taxpayers, we're very sensitive to that, but looking at it, talking with the community about things they value and saying, would the expenditure from 316, which again, we would be allowed to pass, to 535 a year, which is, about $200 additional, would allow the district not to cut like almost $1 million. So I think it's kind of like if we needed to stay tax compliant, we would have to reduce maybe $800,000 of expense. But if to be a bit over that tax compliance, or over what we would need to be over, would then be approximately $200 more per that average taxpayer. But again, thinking about the impact of those type of reductions, $800,000 reduction would be fairly devastating on our budget. So just to kind of give you a sense of what the cost of people, a willingness to go over the tax cap, and then what the dollars associated, allow us to kind of not only maintain, but if there was a need to add a teaching position back, or a science position, or a K6 position, we would be able to do that with that $535 scenario, just to give people dollars to it.
Mm-hmm. And we did live through this last year with regards to the kinds of reductions we had to make. If you recall, they were fairly significant. I'll just skip to this one and we'll go back to that one,
Yep.
Maureen.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the positions, the reductions that we had to take last year to bring in a balanced school budget. So, and all of these were, the number of people who supported, and, the inclusion of those, or adding those back into the budget, and had a lot of rationales and desires for these things to remain in the budget. But when the budget managers are looking at their programs, the first option is to not replace someone who is retiring, for example, because at least with the retirement, we don't have to then reduce the workforce by laying someone off, and then having to the trauma of that is pretty that's not a pleasant situation at all. To have to make that decision, and there are unemployment costs associated with that. But so when decisions are made that are not necessarily ones that are attached to looking at the seniority list, the budget managers, we left it up to the budget managers to go in and see what it was that they felt they could reduce, so that we could come in and have put forth a balanced budget. So as I said, none of these were insignificant, and none of these were necessarily things that people felt that they wanted to give up. In some cases, as I said, it did impact the ability for certain electives to be offered at the high school, for example, and in other places throughout, same for Farragut and for Hillside, and then other things take place which may not be the best things that we have available for our children. So that's a very important consideration and I think recollection around, the impact of relying upon one methodology to balance the budget does in fact, really leave, scars on the system and within programs and across. And I can tell you that in discussions with our budget managers, there's nothing left for them to cut. There's nothing left for them to reduce. And if and if we did have to do that, the inevitable outcome would be increased class sizes, reduction of staff, since most of our budget is associated with employees or with staffing. So that's the place where we're going to receive, we're going to see the larger amounts coming out of the budget. It's not necessarily supplies, but that's the the really challenging part of looking at not developing another approach to looking at what point do you go or exceed the tax cap. That decision has to be driven by how much do you want to cut programs and services in the school district, and what impact will that have on the overall quality of the educational programs, and I think the manner in which the adults who are here, the educators and others who are here, are impacted by those decisions, with larger class sizes or fewer people to be in the classrooms to assist children and work with some of our learners. So it's a really significant decision, and it's worth us reviewing what occurred last year. And I'll go back, Maureen, to that previous slide.
Sure. It was back further, wasn't it, Valerie?
Or one more?
Yeah, let's go one more. Okay, no, we did cover this. I'm sorry. Yes. So again, this is, as we've been talking about the tax cap, because again, this is something we think is really just important to kind of address, because and looking at our numbers, we think it's important to start this conversation about is this the year in which we do consider not to exceed the tax cap, which really it's almost impossible to live under it if you really want to maintain everything. And even though we're going to continue to work with all the budget managers leading up and through the budget development process and final adoption by the board, it would be very difficult to find those, as Valerie said, there's, we of course will tighten up things. And as we get better information, sometimes there are things we can adjust a little bit down. We talked about COVID expenses as an example. If we have a sense that we don't need additional nursing staff, those are items that could be reduced down, but we still do know that there would be, based upon, our numbers, a gap, the size of that gap would be yet to be determined, but it's absolutely a gap. And the only way to close that gap would be reduction. So let's just, this is just to give you a sense of if our budget doesn't pass. So we go through this exercise and we, at the end of the budget process, the board maybe puts forth a budget that would exceed the tax cap. So we can assume we go 1%, we're allowed 1.77. We determined that we needed to be even 2.5%, not maybe or 2.77, and to ensure that we're able to keep our program in servicing. So if we put that budget up for a vote, and again, the difference, which again, there's been much discussion since the creation of the tax cap, is that it seems that it's definitely not fair in that in order to pass a tax cap, a budget that does not exceeds the tax cap, it requires a supermajority. So a supermajority means that you need 60% of your voters have to pass that budget. Now, again, many districts have done so and have done it as we're looking at. To be strategic, I think you are better off building up your levy strategically as you need it, 1%, 1.5% more, than either letting things get to a point in which you're kind of looking for a much larger tax rate increase in out years. So in thinking about putting something like that in front of our voters, if the budget on the first attempt did not pass by that supermajority, so unlike regular budget votes that only requires 50% plus one one person more than 50% to vote on that budget and it passes. This would require 60%. So if the budget were to go down, we do have an opportunity to put the budget up again in front of voters. I forget the exact time frame. I believe it's a few weeks after the original budget vote, because it definitely is before the new fiscal year begins. So I believe it would be in June. And then we could either put forth the same exact budget if we really felt strongly and work to try to get it passed, or we could go in and adjust or make some reductions to not necessarily to be tax cap compliant, but to get the budget down to where we thought we could bring it back to voters. If the budget was not passed on a revote, that's really where the issue comes in, because at that point, you're not allowed to levy one additional dollar. It's not even as though you can go back and say, okay, we'll take, the $700,000 increase. At that point, you're locked into zero. For us, and again, just using one of the budget scenarios we looked at this evening, which was actually the one in which we were getting most of our state aid, that would require a $1.3 million reduction of, it would require, you could use a little bit more fund balance, but it would be it would definitely be $1 million worth of reductions, but the gap would be 1.3 million. And this it's called a contingency budget that you immediately have to adopt, that there is no ability to go back out to voters. So, we think it's really critical as we're thinking that we are going to need to exceed the tax cap this year in order at least to maintain what we currently have, if that's what we believe that, is what we should be putting towards in front of the voters. If that budget goes down, these are the consequences. And I think, it's really important to start having these budget conversations early with, of course, our citizens, and just really, trying to talk through and think about what do we want to see in our budget next year, and what is the willingness to support, or how much additional dollars do people think is the right amount to maintain our programming here at the school. So that's just to kind of not just to give, we throw out a lot of these words when we're talking about budgets, and what's great about the Budget 101 is really to speak through what is it, what is a contingency budget? What does that mean if a budget goes down? And it's just to, all of these sessions are really to help people just gain more knowledge about what are all the different pieces in the budget vote and the budget development. So not so much to make anyone, be nervous, but just to kind of give what's at stake when we put up a budget vote. So that was the purpose of that. And here's our reserves. Now, again, we'll be talking a lot about this as we always do, and it's something we do look at, and the board looks at as we are considering how much of our reserves and fund balance do we want to use toward our next year's budget. So, it is important, as Valerie had mentioned, it's a fine balance, and, there's money, of course, you don't want to hold too much of it, but it really isn't, fund balance isn't really used to, it's not a long-term strategy to pay for things. It's there for really, some are very, as you can see by the names on each of these reserves, they're for a dedicated purpose, right? But the board does have the ability to release funds from there if to balance a budget. So as we look at how these funds are set up, they're not just, monies that can be used to, that they go away. If they're not replenished, they go away. So as we talked about, we can't rely on this as a single source. And the point of bringing up this slide at this time is just to kind of show where, yes, we do have fund balance, and, some of which is dedicated for a particular purpose. And we do have some flexibility. And this is where, if we had a shortfall in state aid, the board could, upon recommendation from Valerie and I, decide to use some of that to address some of that shortfall. It's not money that is guaranteed year over year, and it's not a long-term strategy to pay for things. So it wouldn't be something that we would make a recommendation, we need 2 more teachers, let's just use fund balance. And that's the distinction of how and what is the appropriate use of reserves and fund balance. So again, just to give you a little taste of that, but again, we'll be talking about that throughout our budget process as we deliberate the right amounts to allocate in order to balance next year's budget. So this is the fun part of the meeting, questions. If anyone wants to, I guess, raise their hand in the chat, Valerie will.
Let me just stop sharing my screen.
Okay. I know we shared a lot of information, just different things that we hope to have some more of these, maybe, I don't know if we're going to call them Budget 101, during after we present our original budget to the board, just to allow for some additional Q&A.
So it's a small group. So, you can just speak, just unmute yourselves and just, and share your questions or comments. That would be great.
So Tim put a question in the chat, but I don't know, are we on the webinar, Valerie, where can they unmute themselves?
This is a regular meeting.
Oh.
Yeah, we can unmute.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I wasn't sure. So I do see your question. So why would COVID expenses go up from what is currently being experienced? So when I show the rollover budget, Tim, that's not an increase. It was just that I think our original thinking last year when we developed our budget is that that these would be kind of one-shot deals. We had hoped that anything COVID related, no matter what that was, that we would put some money in the budget, and then in the 21-22 school year, we wouldn't have to, and I don't know if you remember, we actually used some fund balance to pay for that last year because we thought those are one-shot deals. What we're thinking and what we're trying to still understand, as we put in one of our earlier slides, is there still going to be the need for that additional nursing staff? Is there going to be need for some of those software resources and different things like that? So right now, and again, as we get closer to finalizing our budget between now and April, when the board adopts it, we hope to have a much more clear understanding of what we need, or what would be the appropriate amount to put for those expenses. So that's but just to kind of show these are some of the moving parts right now, is why it was on that slide.
Okay, I didn't understand that, but it's okay.
Oh, you didn't understand my explanation?
No, I won't lie to you. I didn't really understand that. I think.
So you're referring to, because on the rollover slide, I had COVID expenses. Is that what we're talking about?
Right. And the part that I think I understood was that this year's COVID expense was paid for out of fund balance. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. So I didn't suggest that it was an increase over what we spent this year. I was suggesting that as we look at some expense drivers, we're anticipating in 21-22 to come up with that 1.7 million. There's still an allocation we believe we may need currently, as of today, for some COVID related expenses. So we needed to factor, that's part of that increase.
Right. Okay.
Because we're starting at zero-based budgeting. So like, if you're just saying at a high level, obviously there's other little ups and downs within the budget, right? So that is something that is still kind of pushing an increase for us, because we had hoped that they would zero out this year.
Right.
I think it's easier when obviously when we go through a line by line budget. I know there were some questions about, well, what exactly is this? But it's sort of to give people an understanding of just opening our doors on July 1st in our new fiscal year. What are our expenses kind of rolling up year over year? So that was, and I just try to highlight some of the expenses that were that is sort of in our thinking right now. But as we obviously present to the board, we're going to have a much more, we'll be showing that in a very in-depth detail. So it'll be it'll be clearer, not more obvious, clearer at that point. So.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question? That I don't want to bogart the
I think that's fine. Unless
how much fund balance was used last year to balance the budget, and how much fund balance is currently projected to be used this year to balance the budget?
So currently, well, there's two. So the fund balance, the appropriated fund balance, last year we used 1,680,000, and right now we're projecting that same amount for next year. And then in terms of reserves, we used, I believe, 500,000 of retirement reserve allocation to offset this 2021 budget, and we're actually looking to kick that up probably to the 600 650 range because we are experiencing an increase in those expenses. So we're, thinking
Right.
to pull a little bit more of that in. So that's, where we are right
Yeah.
now. And that we are, again, that's where we were saying, we start there. And then once we really get a good, well, I don't know how,
Right.
have a good sense with this, once we see what the situation is with the state, Tim, those
Yeah.
numbers may get kicked up. That's kind of what we were suggesting tonight. We would look to, we really don't want to we don't want to reduce to fill that state aid gap. We want to try to strategically.
Yeah, no, I understand it. I understand that the state aid piece is a little bit of a moving piece. It looked like state aid, so just two things. One, I think that if the fund balance usage is the same 2021 and 21-22, then identifying 175K of COVID expenses is probably not the right way to do it, because that that COVID expense is already built into last year's fund balance, and you're talking about a like for like. So if you told me that fund balance in 2020, 2021 was X and fund balance in 21-22 was X minus 175K, and you were pushing the 175K into additional expenses, I'd say, okay, yeah, I see it. But the reality is you spent that money, or we as a district spent that money this year via fund balance, and we're talking about using the same amount of fund balance. So I just kind of flag that as it doesn't, and I could be wrong.
You have to see all the expenses laid out to kind of.
I'm frequently.
It happens to be the same number because I think right now we can comfortably allocate that, knowing where we currently are this year in our spending. So trying to like earmark a reasonable amount and keep that flat. But I think, like I had said even the other night in the finance committee, I know some of it is really, some of it are like somewhat our numbers right now, but it's really to also talk just, to kind of capture more the idea of like, I think most people could probably understand that the tax cap is 777,000. And just, even if you could say, okay, this could be a little less, this could be a little bit more, there is a gap between.
I get it. Right. And I think the point that came out in the finance committee is to go to the community and ask to breach the tax cap means that when we go, maybe I'm wrong, but just from what I've seen in sort of the 2010 episode and otherwise, like going into this with a really fine tipped pen is going to be important. And if I see the 175K as we're at what we should be at theoretically is like peak COVID right now. And over the course of this year, hopefully we're going away from peak COVID. That number is going to raise eyebrows to people.
But honestly, when you
super majority,
sorry,
go ahead. Sorry.
No, I think honestly though, I hear what you say. I think it's really when we get into the real details, it'll be obvious. And again, we hope, because if there's less COVID expenses needed, that means that, we're in a much better place, all of us. So I think we're optimistic, but we do need to, right now, I think it was really, and most districts are trying to figure out like, putting a placeholder, because as of right now, as we look at what we may be able to add, restore, or, consider for, next year, we do have to keep it in there. But again, as we break down the allocations for fund balance and the budget, you'll see it. It's just, I think it's hard because of maybe the way I'm describing it versus if you see it in a line by line. So I don't.
Yeah. No, that's cool. I had a second thing, but I can't remember what it is. And I've spoken too much already. So
that's fine. Well, you know where to find us, but I think that we like these because it allows for a little like what we're doing now and kind of going over things, because certainly anything we can do, as we presented it, it will be easier to kind of see those moving parts. Does anybody else have anything else that we shared tonight, or anything, I guess, related to the budget that you'd like to ask?
I'm gonna jump back since I feel like I have that opportunity.
That's fine. I was going to say that too. I was going to say, Tim.
You knew this was coming. This is just a question I posted in the chat, which is, are the slides themselves going to be posted?
Oh yeah, they can be. Yeah, that's fine.
That would be That would be great, only because I'll send you written questions, very specific written questions,
Sure.
but it helps to work off of the slides as opposed to
Yeah, that's fine.
watching the video.
Usually typically we do put all of our slide presentation. I think the last one, we also want, of course, we're taping this, but that's fine. Usually, all the.
Yeah, no, the slides would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think you guys have been on Zooms a lot the last 3 days. I'll send you questions just written.
Okay. No, I think, this year, we really want to engage people earlier because unfortunately last year we really had developed our budget, and then of course everything that went on, we had to quickly redo our budget multiple times. So, starting this process early and thinking about all the different scenarios, we thought was just a better way to approach
Yeah.
it and engage everyone early on.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, look, I'll say the last sort of thought. She said, I saw this in the finance committee meeting, but obviously the public can't speak in committee meetings. Even in the face of a not trivial, like not insignificant request to go above the tax cap that is being at least talked about in these slides. Whether that number is the final number that gets voted on in the spring is to be determined. It's jumped out at me the projected level of reserves in the out years in your projection model. So it looked to me, if I recall, reserves in, I think, 2023 academic year are down in the 5.3, 5.4 type number. And the thing that I think that really struck me is that that's in the context of a budget that's increasing at a rate of probably over 4%. So relative, like if we went and we looked at reserves sort of 2015 to 2020 or 2013 to 2020, those reserve numbers look like they were probably on average about twice as high for a budget that's probably 25 to 30% lower. So I think that there's something that you and team, to the extent that you have the bandwidth, and I can appreciate if you don't, but if you have the bandwidth, you need to be talking about that, because it's a very, very different reserve profile, and certainly relative to the size of the budget, than has been the case in the past. Right. So that was very striking to me, and I don't think that I'll be able to. If I wrote all that down on paper, you would have been bored by the second sentence. So it's better to use this venue to just kind of flag that to you. It's definitely something that it's a bit outside of the question of how do you balance this year's budget, but I think it's a more holistic issue of, even if you get this budget passed, the trajectory that I see is not a great trajectory.
But part of that too is, also assuming that we won't be able to put money back. But if the levy was higher, that may give us a little bit more wiggle room, because that's also showing a heavy reliance on some of those reserves without the ability to put monies back in. And there are you're right. And there are times where, of course, we always like to see them higher, but we, without having a complete crystal ball, as that tax cap, is now lower, the ability to either replace or put some more money in those reserves. And there are some of the reserves too, like some of it could be because we're paying down some of our tax certiorari. So we're also getting rid of some of our liabilities. But I agree, it's something that we spend a lot of time, as from being on the board, really ensuring, looking at our current, but of course, always keeping in mind those out years and making sure that we're, keeping an appropriate amount of reserves, knowing the importance around that also. So yeah. I think we're in such an unprecedented time. So thinking about our planning in the next couple of years, especially in light of, the state aid and other revenues that we receive dropping down, that it makes it very difficult. So I think it's so, it's also based upon kind of where we are, today and any type of reserves that we're losing or increases in expenses. So you're certainly right. And that's why I had mentioned just, very briefly that is always needs to be spoken about in the context of the budget, because it is extremely important to not, use it all, but use it strategically, but not rely on it as a sole source of, plugging your budget, for lack of better words, because at the trajectory we're going, you won't have any left if we're not careful. So I think that's what we were trying to drive that point home. But and I think that slide kind of shows what your concern is, Tim, that wow, like, what is the correct percentage of the budget we should be
yes, all the same stuff we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, so I think that's always something, and I think last year, when I think there was a good amount of pressure to use a more fund balance, right? I think there was people who may have thought that was the right thing, and I think we all kind of agreed we were very mindful of not to take too much out last year, because we're like, yeah, we don't know where we're going to be in the next couple of years. We can't just do it, So it was a hard decision last year, but I think that the slide, as you mentioned, demonstrates that it is very, you do have to be mindful of the use of that and not deplete yourself. So point taken. And, we of course both agree with that, because we share that concern about not, wanting to ensure we have some, money in there as well. So, yeah, so thank you for that. I guess if there's not, I don't know if anyone else, but again, as Tim said, I think, I know both Valerie and I were, we're both able, if you shoot us an email, anyone who has a question that's specific to tonight's presentation, that we can help clarify, we can, you can shoot us an email as well. The presentation will be up tomorrow. We hope more people have an opportunity to view it. And we really want to be able to engage people prior to the start of our budget season, which is, well, we're in the budget season, but our first budget presentation in a few weeks' time. But we do appreciate everybody's time that took the time to listen to us tonight, and we hope you found it helpful.
Yes, we do.
Very.
And as Maureen said earlier, we do plan to have other opportunities as we, get into the thick of the budget development, as the budget managers, prepare their portions of the budget. We will, make sure that there are opportunities outside of the board meetings. The meetings of the board. I mean, the board meetings are an obligation, under law, to present in those forums. But it certainly doesn't preclude us from creating other opportunities to explain things, that are not, to talk about, some of the components of the budget development and some of these details at a more granular level, in a forum where we just talk about that. So we'll certainly be looking to plan those, and thank you so much for your time and your attention and your questions. And I'm sorry, Tammy, I cut you off. You were about to say something.
Oh, me?
No, I think it was Tim.
Oh,
Tim.
no, not me.
You have another question?
No, I'm done.
No,
Okay.
no, but we do appreciate.
So we'll make this available. We'll send it out as an attachment to, and we'll also add it to our board, our website, so that this information is available. So it'll be both the slide deck as well as the Zoom recording, so that either of those are available. And as Maureen said, she's certainly available. We both are, but Maureen is really the master of the numbers. So she's the go-to for that in every regard, which I'm grateful for. Thank you, Maureen.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. And
All right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.